guys, it's Tori, and today I'm going to be talking about my favorite things I read for school this year. First of all, obviously these are all going to be classics, literature for school, and most of them are going to be 17th century and earlier, which is an area I don't read a lot of, so it was really fun to get an opportunity to read some of those things since I probably would never read them on my own. I will say most of these are short stories, plays, and like parts of larger works. If you're not into that, sorry. As for like talking about these on my channel, I haven't really. I think there's a few I have, but I just thought this would be a fun opportunity to talk about them since I haven't been. I haven't even really included most of them on my Goodreads challenge, although some of them I have if they were like completed works that we read, but a lot of them are, like I said, only part of works, so I didn't include them on that. But I thought I would still talk about all of the ones that I really enjoyed, so let's just get into the video. So the first class I took was English 2400, which was kind of just an intro to literary works kind of a class, and very simple. We read a lot of short stories, poetry, and a few plays. I won't be talking about poetry on here at all just because my feelings towards poetry are kind of very specific to poetry and it feels separate from my feelings about everything else, so I just decided not to talk about that here. Plus, I'm not the biggest fan of poetry anyway, so anyway. I have 6 works from my first English class that I took this year, so we'll run through those really quick. The first is A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner. This is the story told from the perspective of the people of this town in the southern United States. It is a very gothic novel, so we're just basically watching this old family, specifically the youngest member, this woman who lives a very secluded life, and so everybody just gets really random bits of information about her and you put it all together in this story and it's really fun. I found it to be a really good, interesting look at prejudices and things in the southern United States, particularly for when it was written, which was like the late 1800s, I think, when industrialization was becoming more of a thing. I think this was post-Civil War, if I remember correctly, as I think it mentions some things against African Americans, so it might even be turn of the century, but I'm not completely sure. But anyway, around that time period, and it was very interesting to see how this gothic story is able to shed light on some of those prejudicial issues, as well as like an unwillingness to change as the Industrial Revolution is going on. So anyway, very good, highly recommend it, very creepy. My next favorite from this class was The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. This is a story that I have read before. I had read in a previous like high school English class. This story is about a man named Montresor who has a friend named Fortunato who he hates and who he desperately wants to get revenge against, and so it's the story of him getting his revenge for something. We have no idea why he wants revenge so bad. It doesn't make that clear, but it was very creepy, and I haven't read very much Edgar Allan Poe. I've only read this one and A Telltale Heart, so I'd really like to read more, just because I find you'll notice a theme with the short stories on here, that a lot of them are more gothic in nature, and I think I just really like a creepy gothic short story. Like, that's my ideal. I don't really like so much some of the more daily life looks of some of the other short stories as much. It's just not as interesting to me. But anyway, I really liked this one. Definitely recommend if you haven't read it. I'm sure most of you have, because this is one of the more popular Edgar Allan Poe stories, but if you haven't, definitely read it. It's so good. Third is The Death of Ivan Ilych by Leo Tolstoy. This one is technically more like a novella. It's a little bit longer and it has chapters, so anyway, and this follows the story of a man named Ivan Ilych, as it describes his life and how unhappy he is and and we kind of experience his dying with him and how it's brought about and everything, and it's very interesting look at materialism and not appreciating what you have until it's too late, really. And so it's very interesting. It actually starts out from the perspective of his friend, or acquaintance I guess, who ends up coming to his funeral, to Ivan's funeral, and then it goes back in time, back to be in Ivan's perspective of him describing what he's going through. So anyway, very interesting. I really liked it. If you're interested in Russian literature but you don't want to pick up like one of the huge Russian classics, definitely give this one a try, because I think it's, especially if you're interested in Leo Tolstoy, because it's a shorter one and it's really interesting. So next is probably my favorite out of all of them, and that is The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. This is a really creepy short story about a town who's holding their annual lottery, and you don't really know what the lottery is until the end. But let's just say when she put this in a magazine, when she had this published, it was mid-1900s, I think, early 1900s. People didn't like it. They thought it was horrible. So, but I loved this story a lot. It was so creepy, but in a different way than like other like ghosty stories, like the other ones I had read and have talked about. And it made me want to read more Shirley Jackson. So I actually plan to read another one of her books next year, her full-length novels, because I liked this so much. So next is the only play on this list for this class, and that is Antigone by Sophocles. I have read this before, but I had read it on my own, and so it was really nice to be able to read it with a class. This follows the daughter of Oedipus Rex, if you know the story of him. Basically, he ended up murdering his father and marrying his own mother while everybody was trying to keep him from doing that, including himself. He didn't want to do that, and then things happen. That was really vague, but that's the basic thing. And then his daughter slash sister, Antigone, is the focus of this story, and she's just a really fascinating character, and her and Chrétien, her uncle who's taking care of her, are very, very interesting. Like I said, I enjoyed being able to talk about it with my class, and I definitely recommend it if you're interested in Greek literature. And the last one for this class is Hills Like White Elephants by Ernest Hemingway. I have heard a lot of mixed things about Hemingway, and I don't know how much I'd love his full-length novels. I still want to give them a try, but I just think his writing style is not necessarily super up my alley, but I really appreciated this short story. It was just very interesting because it's just like a very mundane situation, but when you really pay attention to what's being said and really pay attention to the emotion that seems to be coming forward, you're able to get a much deeper story, and I thought that was very fascinating, and I've heard Ernest Hemingway writes like that a lot. So okay, next class, British literature. So this is British literature 1, which means it goes from medieval times basically up through the 17th century. Again, I probably would have never read these on my own if it hadn't been for this class, so it was a lot of fun. So I have 3 from medieval times and 3 from after, like, 16th, 17th centuries. So first of all, we read Chavrefoil by Marie de France, which is a poem, longer poem slash story about Tristan and Isolde, and it was just really beautiful. I liked the symbolism a lot in it, and I'll bring up Marie de France later for my other class. We also read the story of Tristan and Isolde, at least parts of it, not the full thing, but I just, even though it was interesting because my class really tore apart this story and how really unhealthy the relationship is between Tristan and Isolde and how selfish they are. But despite the fact that I recognize all that, I thought it was a fun story, and it was fun to pull it apart. So I feel like some stories you don't like certain things about it, but it's fun to pull it apart, and so you end up really liking the story just because it's fun. And so that's how I felt about this. If you don't know, basically Tristan and Isolde, Isolde was going to marry, well, does end up marrying Tristan's uncle. However, on the boat ride over, Tristan is bringing her to his uncle, and they end up taking a love potion and fall in love with each other, and then the whole rest of the story they're just constantly trying to be together, even though she does marry the uncle, and he ends up marrying another woman also named Isolde, who's not very nice. Anyway, very interesting, but definitely some issues with the love story itself, but it's just fun. It's just fun. And then we also read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. I just really like Arthurian romances, and I like seeing the original source material for them because there's so many retellings. But this one was another one, just fun adventure kind of a story, and Sir Gawain is probably one of my favorite knights. What I read about him, I just really appreciate him because I feel like he's kind of this knight who in a lot of the stories is kind of in the background, but he's always loyal to Arthur, and it's just, I just really like him. Plus the Green Knight, like, all dressed and everything's green on him, like, what? it's so weird, but it's so fun. Anyway, and his head gets chopped off, but he's still alive. And it's just like a classic knight adventure story, and I just love it. Next, for the 16th, 17th century ones, I really liked the Faerie Queene by Edmund Spenser. We only read book 1. This is, if you don't know, this is like a huge epic poem book. It's like over 1,000 pages, super long. I don't know if I'll ever read the whole thing because I don't know if I care quite that much, but just because this is a time period where the literature, while I enjoy it, it's not really something I'm drawn to as much. This one, at least book 1, follows, it's very symbolic, but it follows this knight named Red Cross who is going on this adventure to save the parents of his woman, Una. While on the surface it seems like a children's story, it has a lot of symbolism. Una, for example, is meant to represent truth, and so there's a lot of depth to her character. It's also meant to represent English history and English victory over other people's, so it's just very symbolic, and I just thought it was a lot of fun to read as well. Plus there's some very interesting images in that, graphic, odd images of like baby dragons licking up the blood of their mother, their dead mother, like creepy, but it's fun, very knightly. Then we also read the Arcadia by Sir Philip Sidney, which I ended up really liking. Again, with this one we only read, I think it was only actually 1 chapter from the overall thing. I don't know how long the actual thing is, but this story follows a man who is in love with this woman, but her parents don't like him and banish him, but he sneaks back in and dresses up as a large Amazon woman who comes in, and he's trying to get his love's attention, but she doesn't know it's him. But then, first of all, his love's father falls in love with him as this woman, and then his love's mother figures out that it's him and ends up falling in love with him. So it's really awkward. It's such a weird story. It kind of reminds me of Twelfth Night, but it's really funny, and I just really liked it. And then the last one from this class was, of course, the only Shakespeare we read, Othello, had to be on this list because I really, really, really liked it. I haven't read a ton of Shakespeare. I mean, I've read, like, including this one, like 7 plays by him. So again, not a ton, but I really like Shakespeare, and I really liked Othello a lot. This was my first time reading it, and I love Desdemona and Emilia. I also find Iago and Othello and comparing them to be very interesting, and Iago is definitely one of Shakespeare's most evil characters, so he's just fascinating. He's very persuasive, which makes him just so terrifying, and I just love him. So anyway, great play. If you haven't read it yet, definitely try it out. The last class I took was Continental European Literature, which is basically everything that's not British. So this one I actually have 7 for. The other 2 I had 6 for, but I have 7 for this one because I honestly liked what we read in this class the most out of all my classes. But anyway, let's just get into this. So first of all, my favorite of the Greek fictional literature that we read was Medea by Euripides. This is the story of a woman who is betrayed by her husband, and so she kind of has a freak out, and in order to get back at him, murders their children. And it sounds horrible, but Medea is a really interesting character to get to know and study, and I just really liked it. We also read The Apology by Plato, which is a nonfiction talking about the trial of Sophocles and basically his defense of himself. It was just really interesting, and Sophocles came across so sarcastic, and I thought it was so funny, and it's written in a narrative style, so it's really easy to get into overall, and he just roasts them, and it's the best thing ever. And like I said earlier, we are back to Marie de France. In this class we read Lanval and The Nightingale, which is a shorter one, both of which were a lot of fun. I just really like Marie de France's writing style overall. Then we read Sir Perceval, the story of the Grail by Chrétien de Troyes. I don't think I said that very well, but anyway, this one basically just follows Sir Perceval, and I love Sir Perceval. He's just such a naive, innocent little boy. and I wish there was more to his story because it kind of just ends. If you've ever read it, you'll know what I'm talking about, but it's just really sad because you can tell there's a lot more, and we're not really sure whether Chrétien de Troyes meant to end it that way or if he had more to say and just didn't ever get to it. We don't really know. So it's a little sad, but I still really liked what we have. Next we read a couple stories from the Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, which I absolutely loved. It was definitely one where to explain what it is, it's this very large book full of just a bunch of short stories for women. At the time it was more to be like, women don't have anything to do, but they have minds and they have needs for entertainment, and so he wrote these stories to entertain women. It's very interesting because a lot of the portrayals of women are not great, a little bit objectifying for sure, but that being said, they made me laugh. I definitely had a fun time reading them. They were very humorous in my opinion. This is when I actually want to get a copy of the whole thing so I can read more of the stories because I liked it that much. Next we read a few little snippets of writings by Niccolo Machiavelli, including the parts from The Prince and some quotes by him about republicanism, and I really liked it, surprisingly. Like, I think, like, when you hear Machiavelli or Machiavellian, you think of someone who's very intense and strict and almost evil, like an evil leader in a lot of ways. And that's not really, like, if you actually read it, it is a strict leader, but it's the idea of, well, first of all, he liked the idea more of a republic than of a monarchy, but he talks about how a leader needs to do what needs to be done for the good of the country, regardless of whether it will make him popular, which is a very hard thing to do. And I just thought it was very practical. A lot of his thoughts were very practical, and I found his writing to be easy to understand, which a lot of those things are often pretty hard to understand. So I appreciated that it was fairly easy to get into, and yeah, I recommend it if you're curious. And the last one is one I have read before, but we just read part of it this time. That is Don Quixote by Miguel Cervantes. I have read the entirety of this before and loved it. There's a reason why it's such a popular novel even today. Because it's so relatable, it's so funny. It's basically about, if you don't know, it's about this old man who reads all these romances, and eventually he once decides he's going to be a knight, even though this is way after the time of knights, and he goes on all these adventures. He loses his mind, goes on all these adventures. A very famous one is the windmills. He finds some windmills and says that they are giants and fights them. And it's just really funny because I think we all have those moments where we just get so into a book that we imagine ourselves there. And it's just, I just love Don Quixote so much, so I had to include it on this list. Anyway, that is it. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know down below if you have had some books you've read in classes that you've really ended up enjoying more than you thought you would, as I would love to know. And I will actually talk to you in a few days, because starting this week, it being Christmas break for me, I'm going to start uploading a couple videos a week instead of just one, so look forward to that. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you then. Bye!